Hello there, it's me, Overflow. Today I have a sad announcement. I switched back to Windows. Now, many of you might know me as a Linux user, and I am a Linux user, but recently I found Linux more and more annoying to use. Most of the things that bugged me were small, but it really screamed the fact that Linux is missing the polish, and that's one of the main reasons why I switched. For example, I usually switch between GNOME and KDE depending on the task that I'm doing. If I need a lot of window switching and I have lots of windows open because GNOME's virtual desktops is just so good and intuitive, I'll use GNOME. For everything else, I'll just go with KDE. This switch is really what makes the OS feel unpolished. On GNOME, since I'm on GNOME 42, they changed how light and dark mode work. Before, it would be switching the entire GTK theme, but now it's built in, and themes look different across apps. Some apps don't respect dark mode, so I'll have some light mode apps and some dark mode apps, and they don't fit into each other. And it's also extremely annoying that some apps still use the GTK 3 Advaita style instead of the GTK 4, and I tried so many things to try and solve the problem, but nothing truly solved the problem in the end. So when I got sick of GNOME looking wacky, I switched to KDE. KDE was mostly fine until I tried to add theming. The second I added theming, things began breaking. Kden's live backgrounds would just go away and half of it would be transparent. On KDE, things felt very consistent, but every app had some problem with theming that just made things feel out of place. I've also tried other desktop environments, but most of them would just have a mess up theme because I have GNOME 42 installed. I tried Cinnamon, I tried Pantheon. All of them just felt really weird because, first of all, their default themes don't look good, and I can't change the theme because GNOME 42 is breaking something. Anyways, another example is the base distro. For most of my time on Linux, I've used Arch, and the Arch experience was really good, and there's a reason why I stuck with it for so long. But Arch has its problems as well, since Arch is a minimalist distro, which means that there's fewer things installed by default. Every time I tried to do something on my Arch system, some dependency would be missing, and I have to boot up a terminal to install the package. And of course, I tried other Linux distros. In fact, I tried mostly all the big ones, and I have gathered a list of why I don't like them. So to start, we have Debian, which packages are way too old. apt is really slow and it has not been stable for me, even though Debian is supposed to be stable. Next up, we have just Debian based, and these distros inherit the problems that I have with Debian, and most of the time they don't solve the problem. Then we have Ubuntu, which Ubuntu is really slow to adopt new features, and they're trying to embrace snaps, which I hate snaps. And Ubuntu also has an odd and backwards way of doing things. Next up is Fedora. Fedora's package manager, DNF, is also really slow, and most of the time when I try and look up a tutorial for Fedora, it will be extremely outdated and nothing actually works. And then, of course, the Anaconda installer is just straight up bad. Next up, Opensuse Tumbleweed. Yast as an installer is way too slow, and of course, Yast breaks the second you try and do any theming. It'll look extremely bad, and if you don't do theming, it looks like it came out straight from Windows 95. And Yast is just a pain to use because when you launch it, it doesn't launch with sudo privileges or root privileges, and then every time you click on something, it'll ask you for root privileges. It's super annoying, and sometimes, like, the configuration things just don't work. OpenSUSE Sleep contains most of the things I have problems with about OpenSUSE Tumbleweed, except for that the packages are just so old, and the package manager Zyper for both of them are really slow. Next up, Arch Linux. The only problem that I have with it is that it takes too long to install, and of course, the packages, there aren't many of them by default, so it's really annoying having to grab packages when you're just trying to do some work. And of course, we have EndeavourOS. I feel like EndeavourOS is too terminal-centric, and of course, it's okay to be terminal-centric, but they also fill the distro up to the brim with GUI configuration tool, so they don't actually feel like they want to be terminal-centric or GUI-based. They're just kind of in the middle with a bunch of random utilities, and I don't like that. Next up is Garuda Linux. It's bloated, there's no light theme, and some of you might call me a monster, but I love light theme. I'll use Discord light theme, all of my computers are on light theme. And lastly, Garuda Linux's config tools are super annoying. Sometimes they'll just have random donate buttons, sometimes they'll pop up, sometimes you'll never know when a config tool is finished or not, and you'll try and close it, and oh no, another window pops up. And then we have another Arch-based system, Manjaro. Manjaro feels like Arch, but just worse in every way. You get older packages because they're held back for 2 weeks. It also feels like the Manjaro devs don't know what they're actually doing, because when their SSL certificate expired, they just told everyone to wind back the clocks. That's not a way that you solve the problem, and that's not how you run a Linux distro. Next up is Elementary OS. Elementary OS was pretty good, but sometimes Pantheon, its desktop environment, will just randomly break, and it's also really out of date. If you use Elementary OS during the 5.0 days and the 5.1 days, they went about 3 years without having any updates. It's been better recently and it started picking up, but it's still really out of date. Next up is Popos. Popos just doesn't stand out. Like, it has a desktop environment, but it's GNOME at heart, and it's just kind of like another one of those Ubuntu-based distros that just don't really make sense. There's nothing special about it that really attracts me to it. And finally, for those people who really like these distros, Void Linux. Void Linux XPS is just really confusing. There's just way too many like XPS dash somethings. Just like turn them into flags. And then there's almost no packages that you would actually want. Nobody makes tutorials for Void Linux, and there's very low software. And I know people are going to talk about, like, Gentoo. I don't like Gentoo because my computers aren't very powerful. I have a 6-core Intel i5-9400F and an i5-8210Y. Both of them are not very powerful, and it takes forever to compile. What I want my computer to do is I just want it to be able to, like, do work. I don't want to spend 10 hours while I'm sleeping just to compile. I want someone else with a better computer to compile them for me, and I'll just install them. Of course, finally, BSDs. I don't really want to use BSDs because I have an NVIDIA graphics card and I'm not sure about the support. And none of the BSDs are really enticing to me. It just feels like Linux users, if you're bored of Linux and you just want to be an elite for no reason whatsoever. Like, if you're using BSD so you can be an elite, how about you just, like, go play with your Arch system instead? So, those are all the Linux distros that I've tried, and all of them just had problems that make me switch between them over and over again so I could find the distros with the least problems. But you may be asking the whole time, but why? Why would you switch back to Windows, the worst thing of all? Of course, we all know that Windows sucks, and it does. Privacy sucks on it, the installer sucks on it, and Microsoft is always in your face. You have OneDrive, you have Cortana, and of course, recently I found out that Windows Search sucks so much because it has this weird algorithm that nobody ever wants. So, at this point, sometimes Windows will just be slightly better for me since most software is made for Windows and there's just less hassle in using the system. Like, when I just want to, like, make a LibreOffice presentation, I don't have to grab LibreOffice, download 7 billion fonts because one character isn't included in my font pack. There's just, like, less of these hassle things. And of course, I'm not saying that Windows is perfect, but with some tweaks, I got it pretty close to perfect. Of course, I'm not using the official ISO, since that just takes a really long time to install. There's a couple billion questions, and, like, it feels like every question is out there so that Microsoft can somehow take your information and you would technically agree to it. The install is just freaking annoying when it asks you to do Microsoft accounts. There's just, like, so many other random things that the installer does, like having Cortana yell at you if you don't respond to her in, like, 0.5 seconds. After that, the OS just feels bloated. Like, there's way too much pre-installed applications. There's just way too much junk that most people will never use. And that's really what makes me want to switch to Linux. And what did I do to solve those problems? I chose ReviOS. ReviOS is a Windows distribution that basically strips all the annoying things out of Windows so that you just have a better experience. And I chose ReviOS over other OSs like Windows 10 Ameliorated Edition, since Windows 10 AME is on version 1709, which is really outdated. And GGOS, I chose that over because I still didn't want to do the Windows setup. And GGOS was more towards gamers, and of course I do game, but I don't want my whole OS to be centric around gaming tweaks. And I also liked ReviOS because they just had ISOs pre-built for me. And so I used them before, and in fact I made a video about them. So I just went with RevOS for this time. And of course, I went with RevOS 11 because I really like the way that Windows 11 looks. And since all of the stupid Windows 11 Microsoft BS is removed, Windows 11 actually feels fast and slim, and it feels polished. And of course, I still don't really like Windows. It's not the best for my workflow. For example, like coding, like it's so annoying to not just have a package manager that can install all my terminal utilities. In fact, I spent around half an hour trying to install GCCs for my C++ code, and I have to jump through so many hoops, like doing custom ISOs to make it good. So, of course, Windows isn't the best, and Linux just needs a little polish. So, what is the best OS? And maybe for you, it'll be a best OS too. Well, here's the solution. I've been eyeing macOS for a really long time. So I used to be a Mac user, and if you look at any of my previous videos, most of them were all edited on a MacBook, or they were filmed on a MacBook, and even recently I had a MacBook video. I also had the entire Apple ecosystem, and now, the more that I think about it, macOS was just really enjoyable. There was no bloat on the system when you first installed it. The setup was easy, there's no random questions, and software was just easy to install. And of course, this isn't built into macOS, but it was something for macOS. The Brew package manager was just like so good. It had lots and lots of packages, and there wasn't a time where I just thought, ugh, Brew is so slow, because Brew isn't the only source that you're getting your software from. You still get your software from other things, so you're not depending wholly on one bad program. So that's what made Brew really good. And of course, to try this and just make sure I wasn't having some like weird thoughts that made it better than it really was, I dug out my old MacBook and I tried it out for a week, and my experience was so good. Like, it reminded me on what I was missing out on. Like, let's not talk about the MacBook hardware, because that's not the important thing, and I have a really old MacBook, but the software, like, the gestures make sense, it's truly integrated with other systems, it looks really good, and I like the concept of having a dock and a menu bar, and here's why I really liked it. It wasn't because of all the UI and the cosmetics, but because of what was laying under. So, macOS is the best of Linux and Windows mixed together. Because macOS is based on Unix, I get all of the Unix commands that I know and love, and of course that are better than PowerShell commands, because PowerShell is truly stupid. And of course, you still get amazing software support, because it's macOS, it's a big system, instead of Linux being kind of smaller. And of course, everything is well integrated. I have an Apple Watch. It's super cool when you just open your MacBook lid and your MacBook unlocks from your Apple Watch. And the only reason why I can't stay on macOS is that my MacBook hardware just straight up sucks, and I'm not Hackintoshing. And because with these systems, the main reason I switched to Windows is for polish and stability, and Mac OS Hackintoshing is not polished, nor is it stable. So, here is the conclusion. Why did I switch to Windows? Because Linux just needs a little bit more polish. That's it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.